She didn't say a word for 14 months. Not one. Not to me, not to her teachers, not to the child psychologist the school board sent us to twice. Not even when she was scared. And I want to tell you, it wasn't silence like a quiet house. It was silence like holding your breath underwater. Like the world had gotten so loud and so wrong that the only honest response was to stop adding to it. Her name is Thea. She was 4 when her mother left. She's 6 now, and for most of those 2 years, she's moved through the world like she was trying not to disturb it. Small footsteps, eyes that took everything in. A little person deciding very carefully what was worth trusting. I'm not going to tell you I handled it perfectly. I'm going to tell you the truth. I work construction, residential framing, mostly. The kind of work where you show up before the sun does and you leave when your back tells you to. I grew up outside Sudbury, moved to Barrie when Thea was still a baby, and I've spent most of my adult life being the kind of man who knows how to fix things with his hands and has no idea what to do when the thing that's broken is invisible. After Claire left, I had a 2-bedroom apartment off Essa Road, a truck with 240,000 kilometers on it, and a daughter who had decided the world did not deserve her voice. The child psychologist, a kind woman named Dr. Fournier, told me that Thea's selective mutism was likely situational, likely related to the disruption, likely to resolve with time and consistency and low pressure. She said likely a lot. I started to hate that word. I did everything I was supposed to do. I kept her routine. I read to her every night, even when she fell asleep before the 3rd page. I made her lunches with the crusts cut off because that was the one thing she'd ever told me she cared about, back when she was still telling me things. I dropped her at school every morning, and I picked her up every afternoon, and I said the same thing when she got in the truck. Good day or hard day. She'd hold up 1 finger for hard, 2 for okay, 3 for good. 3 fingers were rare. I learned to be grateful for 2. I don't know exactly when I stopped expecting her to get better. I think it happened slowly, the way most things do. You wake up one morning, and you realize you've stopped waiting for something. You've just started living in the shape of its absence. That's where I was when I met Vera Langford. I should explain how it happened, because it sounds like a story someone made up, and I understand why. But I was there. I know what I saw. There's a community garden on the north end of Barrie, out past the splash pad, near the edge of Sunnydale Park. I'd signed us up for a plot the spring before, mostly because I needed somewhere to take Thea on weekends that didn't involve screens or noise or other kids asking her why she never talked. She liked dirt. She liked watching things grow. She would crouch down next to a bean plant for 10 minutes and just look at it. And it was the most peaceful I ever saw her. We were there on a Saturday morning in late May. It had rained the night before, so the whole place smelled like wet earth and cut grass, and Thea was pulling weeds with the focus of a surgeon. I was turning the soil on the other side of the plot, half listening to a podcast, when I heard something that made me pull out my earbuds. A woman, maybe 2 plots over, swearing quietly in French. Not badly. Not at anyone. Just the kind of low, frustrated muttering you do when something's not cooperating. She was kneeling in the dirt in clothes that were not garden clothes. Light gray linen pants, a cream blouse, and she was trying to untangle a tomato cage that had collapsed into itself over the winter. It had become a complete structural disaster. I'd seen cleaner demolition sites. I don't know why I walked over. I'm not someone who inserts himself. But something about the gap between how she was dressed and what she was doing, and the way she was absolutely refusing to give up on this ruined tomato cage, it made me laugh a little, and then feel bad about laughing, and then walk over. You need a different angle, I said. If you pull from the top, you'll just tighten the twist. Start from the bottom crosspiece. She looked up at me. She had dark eyes, the kind that are doing a lot of thinking even when the face is still. She looked at me for a moment, then looked back at the cage. Show me, she said. So I did. I crouched down, worked the bottom ring free first, then walked the whole structure back to flat in about 45 seconds. It's the kind of thing you figure out when you've been untangling rebar and wire on job sites for 15 years. Thank you, she said. And then, after a pause, you make that look embarrassingly easy. It's just geometry, I said. She smiled at that. Not a big smile, but a real one. The kind that reaches the eyes first. Her name was Vera. She didn't offer a last name, and I didn't ask. We talked for a few minutes about the garden. She'd only just started the plot, she said. the season before, after her daughter had suggested it. She wanted to grow heirloom tomatoes and had, as I could see, encountered some infrastructure challenges. I told her the name of a good hardware store on Dunlop that carried the heavier gauge cages. She wrote it down in her phone with the same seriousness you'd give to a boardroom note. I went back to my plot. Thea had stopped weeding and was watching us. When I crouched down next to her, she held up 2 fingers. Okay, Day. I thought that was it. The second time I saw her, Thea saw her first. We were at the garden again 3 weeks later, and Vera was there with a girl about Thea's age. Her daughter, I guessed, maybe 5 or 6, with her mother's dark eyes and a bright yellow raincoat despite the clear sky. The little girl was talking constantly, narrating everything she saw. A bee, a worm, the color of a carrot top. She was a person who found the world endlessly interesting and wanted to report all of it immediately. Thea watched her from our plot without moving. I watched Thea watch her. The little girl noticed Thea eventually the way kids do. Sudden pivot, direct approach, no preamble. She walked right up to the edge of our plot and said, "Do you want to see a really big worm?" I found it by the compost. Thea looked at me. I kept my face neutral. No encouragement, no pressure. Dr. Fournier had been very clear about pressure. Thea looked back at the little girl, and then she stood up and followed her. She didn't say anything, but she followed. And I stood there with my trowel, and I did not know what to do with the feeling that came up in my chest, because it was too big to name, and I'd learned to be careful about naming things too early. Vera came to stand beside me. We watched our daughters crouch over the compost bin together. The little girl, Nadia, I learned later, kept up her running commentary. Thea kept listening. After a while, Thea pointed at something. Nadia nodded enthusiastically. They moved on to the next thing. "She doesn't usually do that," I said. "Go with other kids." Vera was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Nadia doesn't usually stop to find out if someone wants to come along. She just assumes they do." We stood there for a while without saying anything else. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was more like 2 people who had both been carrying something heavy, just setting it down for a second. I need to tell you about Vera, because this story doesn't make sense without understanding who she is, and she is not who I assumed. I found out her last name about a month in when I mentioned the community garden to a guy I work with, Roland, who's lived in Barrie his whole life and knows everyone's business, and he went very still when I described the woman with the linen pants and the tomato cage. "Vera Langford," he said. "I don't know her last name, dark hair, late 30s, drives a white Range Rover. I don't know what she drives. That's Vera Langford. She runs Langford Capital. Her father started it. She took it over maybe 8 years ago. They do private equity. She's worth," he stopped, "a lot. She's worth a lot." I didn't say anything for a minute. "She gardens?" he said. I drove home thinking about that. And the thing I kept coming back to wasn't the money, it was the tomato cage. The way she'd been kneeling in the dirt in her good clothes, genuinely frustrated, genuinely trying. That doesn't tell you nothing about a person. I didn't change anything. I didn't start being different at the garden. I didn't look her up online or try to figure out what it meant. I just kept showing up on Saturday mornings with Thea, and she kept showing up with Nadia, and our daughters had become something. Not exactly friends, because Thea still didn't talk, but something. They had a system. Nadia talked. Thea pointed and nodded and occasionally made small sounds that weren't words but were clearly communication. Nadia adapted to this completely, without comment, without making it a thing. She just started watching Thea's face and hands the same way she'd watch anything she found interesting. I thought about what Vera had said. She just assumes they want to come along. The thing about Vera is that she never once made me feel like I was in the wrong place. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this kind of story usually goes, and I want to tell you this one went differently. She never looked at my truck. She never made a comment about my work that had that particular quality of while careful neutrality that rich people sometimes have when they're trying not to sound like they're judging you. She asked me about framing the way she asked me about the tomato cage. Like she actually wanted to know. We started talking more, not making plans exactly. Just talking when we were both at the garden. Then one morning she brought 2 coffees from a place on Dunlop and handed me one without making it into a moment, and that became a thing. Coffee from the brown bag place, early Saturday, while the girls did their rounds. She was going? Through something, I could tell, the way you can tell when someone's carrying weight, even when they're not talking about it. Later I'd learned that she was in the middle of a complicated negotiation to take her company public, that her board had concerns she thought were about her gender as much as her strategy, that she'd been fighting the same fight for 8 years in slightly different configurations. But at the time I just knew she had the look of someone who was running on adrenaline and not enough sleep, and who had maybe forgotten what it felt like to sit still. The garden made her sit still. Our daughters made her sit still. I think I might have made her sit still, a little. Not because I said anything particularly wise, mostly because I didn't need anything from her. I wasn't trying to impress her or get something or be in her orbit for any reason. I was just a guy who knew about tomato cages and showed up on Saturday mornings, and maybe that was its own kind of rest. I should tell you about the morning everything changed. It was mid-August. Hot for Barrie, the kind of humidity that makes the air thick. Thea and I got to the garden later than usual because I'd had a job run long on Friday and slept through my alarm. Vera and Nadia were already there. Nadia was, as always, in motion. Thea made a beeline for her without looking at me at all, which still did something to my heart every time. Vera handed me a coffee. I sat down on the bench at the edge of the plot. There was something off about that morning, not between us, but in Vera. She was quieter than usual. She kept looking at her phone, then putting it face down, then picking it up again. I didn't ask. I've learned that some people need you to ask, and some people need you to just be there until they decide to say it. Vera was the second kind. After a while she said, "My board meets Tuesday. They're going to ask me to step back to a co-CEO structure." I didn't know enough about her world to know exactly what that meant, but I knew from her voice what it meant to her. "Is that what you want?" I asked. She laughed. It came out sharper than she meant it to. "No, it's what they want because they don't trust a woman to take a company through an IPO without a man standing next to her." I thought about that. Are they wrong about the IPO part? Absolutely not. Then tell them that. She looked at me like I'd said something slightly absurd. "It's more complicated than that." "I know," I said. Sometimes when everything feels complicated, the thing underneath it is simple. What do you know for certain?" She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought I'd said the wrong thing. Then she said, "I know I've built something real, and I know I'm the right person to take it through this." "Okay," I said. "Okay, that's the thing you know. Start there." She looked at me for a moment. Then she turned back to watch the girls. Nadia was explaining the life cycle of a ladybug to Thea with complete authority. Thea was sitting very still, the way she did when she was paying close attention. "Joel," Vera said. "Yeah, thank you. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and drank my coffee, and it was quiet in the good way again. My name is Joel Bastien. I should have told you that earlier. I'm 38 years old. I grew up in a town where most of my family worked the mines or the trades, and you learned early that honest work is honest work and nobody gets to make you feel small for it. My father poured concrete for 40 years and died with his hands still strong. I think about that sometimes. I'm telling you my name now because I want you to understand that what happened next happened to a real person, not a character, not a type, not the working-class guy who got lucky. A man who packed his daughter's lunch every morning and checked her snow boots for holes every winter, and sat outside her bedroom door some nights and just listened to her breathe because it was the most reassuring sound in the world. I want you to understand that because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of thing that sounds like it was always going to happen, and it wasn't. It almost didn't. Vera asked me to dinner in late September. Not the garden. Not coffee. Dinner. She said it plainly, looking right at me, and I appreciated that. No ambiguity. No deniability. She'd made a reservation at a place on Lakeshore that I'd driven past many times and never gone into. I said yes, obviously. But I want to tell you what happened the night before, because it matters. I was doing Thea's bedtime. We were on our second picture book. She'd been letting me read more lately, staying awake longer, when she did something she'd never done before. She put her hand on the page to stop me from turning it. I stopped. She looked at the illustration. It was a picture of a family. 2 adults, a child, a dog standing in front of a house. Standard stuff. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up at me. I said very carefully, "Do you like that picture?" She looked back at it. Then she pointed, first to the child in the illustration, then to the adult standing on the left, then, slowly, to the empty space on the right side. I sat with that for a second. My heart was doing something it had no business doing at bedtime. I said, "Is there something missing?" She didn't answer, but she didn't look away from the space either. I said, "I don't know what's going to happen, Thea. I really don't. But you're not missing anything. You've got me. We've got each other, okay?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she held up 2 fingers. "Okay." I turned off the light and sat outside her door for a long time that night. The dinner was good. Better than good. The place had a wood-burning fireplace, and we stayed for 3 hours without noticing. She told me about her father, who had started the company from nothing, and taught her to read a balance sheet when she was 12. I told her about my father, the concrete, the hands. She told me that Nadia's father had left when Nadia was 2. Not because of anything dramatic, she said, but because he'd wanted a quieter life and her ambition had felt, to him, like a kind of noise. I told her about Claire, who had wanted something I couldn't name, and probably she couldn't either, just something different, and how I'd made peace with not knowing exactly what. We talked about the girls, about what it was like to raise a person alone, about the specific loneliness of doing it right next to someone who used to be there. At the end of the night, standing in the parking lot, she said, "I want to be honest with you about something." I said, "Okay." "I don't do this," she said. "I haven't, in a long time. I'm not sure I know how." I said, "Neither do I. I'm aware that my life is complicated, in ways yours isn't." I thought about that. I'm not sure complicated is the word I'd use, just different complications. She smiled at that. "The real one, the one that starts in the eyes. Is it okay if we figure it out slowly?" She said. "That's the only way I know how to do anything," I said. The weeks that followed were the quietest good thing I've ever lived through. We didn't rush. We brought the girls to the garden in the fall, watched them rake leaves with a seriousness that made both of us laugh. We had dinner twice more. We talked on the phone late on nights when Thea was asleep, in those long, quiet conversations where you stop tracking the time. She went to the board meeting and she did not accept the co-CEO structure. I don't know exactly what she said. She told me it went well, and I believed her, because something had shifted in her after that morning at the garden. She carried herself differently, less braced. Nadia remained the most straightforward person in any room she entered. She had decided, with the complete confidence of a 6-year-old, that I was her friend's dad and therefore also her friend, and conducted herself accordingly. She would tell me things she'd learned about insects with the same gravity she'd have used delivering financial projections. I started looking things up in advance so I could ask good questions. And Thea. I want to tell you about Thea carefully, because this is the part that matters most, and I don't want to get it wrong. She and Nadia had developed something real. A language that wasn't language, gesture and expression and proximity. Nadia was the only person outside of me who seemed to simply accept that Thea communicated differently and didn't need it to change. She never said, "Why won't you talk?" or "use your words," or any of the things that made Thea pull inward. She just adapted, the way water does around a stone. One afternoon in October, the 4 of us were at the garden for what was probably the last good weekend of the season. The girls were in the far corner, sitting in the dirt, doing something that involved several sticks and what appeared to be an elaborate architecture project. Vera and I were drinking coffee on the bench. It was one of those fall afternoons where the light goes golden and specific and makes everything look slightly more significant than it is. I remember thinking, this is good, just this, whatever happens next, this is good. And then I heard something, small, quiet, coming from the corner where the girls were. A word, one word. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. Vera went very still beside me. She'd heard it too. It was Thea's voice, thin and careful, like something that had been kept somewhere dark and was trying the light for the first time. She had looked at Nadia and said one word, more. She wanted more sticks. She was directing the architecture project. She needed more sticks. Nadia didn't react the way I might have, if I'm honest. She didn't gasp or make it into a thing. She just picked up more sticks and handed them over and said, "Okay, here, I found a really straight one," and they went back to work. I put my coffee down very slowly. I looked at the ground. I was not going to cry in front of Vera Langford. Vera put her hand over mine on the bench. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We sat there in that October light while our daughters built something in the dirt, and I understood, in a way I couldn't have articulated out loud, that the reason this woman had come into my life was not because I deserved it, or earned it, or because the universe was keeping score. It was because some things happen when you stop defending yourself against them. When you just show up on a Saturday morning, and you fix what's in front of you, and you let things take the shape they're going to take. I'll tell you how things stand now, because I think you deserve the honest version, not the clean version. Thea has started speaking in small amounts, not to everyone. Not yet, but she talks to Nadia constantly now in a low voice, and she talks to me every morning over breakfast, and she has begun to understand, slowly, that her voice is hers to give and the world does not get to demand it from her. She still holds up fingers, sometimes, old habit, but now she also says the number out loud. Vera and I are taking it slowly. That's what we said we'd do, and that's what we're doing. There are complications, and we are learning each other's complicated parts without pretending they're simple. I still drive the same truck. I still show up at 6 in the morning on job sites in Barrie and Innisfil, and sometimes up in Midland. She still runs a company that a lot of people have very strong opinions about. We have dinner on Friday nights when Nadia has a sleepover at her grandmother's and Thea's with my mom. We talk on the phone too late. We go to the garden when there's still a garden to go to. It is not a perfect story. I'm not sure I trust perfect stories. But I want to tell you what I think about, now, when I drive to work in the dark. I think about a 6-year-old girl who decided the world was too loud and went quiet, and what it took to make her want to try again. It wasn't a specialist. It wasn't a program. It wasn't anything anyone did on purpose or planned. It was a kid in a yellow raincoat who walked up to the edge of a garden plot and said, "Do you want to come see something?" And just assumed the answer was yes. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. Someone saw her, and didn't make it weird, and assumed she was worth including. If you have someone like that in your life, someone who saw you when you were quiet, who didn't push, who just made space and waited, I want you to think about them right now. Not because I'm going to tell you to go call them, though maybe you should, but because I think some of us walk around not realizing how rare that is, how much it cost them, and how much it gave us. My name is Bastien. I'm a framing carpenter from Barrie, Ontario. My daughter said her first word in 14 months on a Tuesday afternoon in October, in a community garden, over a pile of sticks. And if that's all I get, if that's the only miracle I'm allowed, it's enough. It's more than enough. But I don't think it's all I get.